The conference room on the 24th floor was dead silent, save for the frantic, rhythmic ticking of the court reporter's stenograph machine. "Let the record show," my lawyer, Thatcher Cross, announced to the room, his voice dangerously calm, "that we are now reviewing authenticated digital evidence retrieved from the onboard security array of my client's vehicle." I sat entirely still, my hands clenched into tight fists beneath the polished quartz table. Across from me sat Karen Stone, the tyrannical president of the Summit Ridge Homeowners Association. Her hands were folded neatly over a pristine manila folder. Her rigid, lacquered hair hadn't moved an inch, and up until 10 seconds ago, she had been wearing a smirk of pure, administrative triumph. She truly believed this was the day she officially transferred a multi-million-dollar legal liability to my name. She truly believed she had ruined me. "First," Thatcher said, clicking a file link on his tablet, "let us examine the live HOA ledger that Mrs. Stone swore under oath contains no record of a prior fine." A bright orange document flashed onto the massive wall monitor. "This is a verified copy of an automated email sent from the Summit Ridge server to my client's personal inbox, timestamped Tuesday at 5:01 a.m. Dr. Thorne's high-powered personal injury lawyer leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she read the text aloud. "Violation notice. Unauthorized signage. Fine. $250. Issued by K. Stone." The corporate defense lawyers in the identical charcoal suits suddenly stopped nodding. The air in the room turned instantly frigid. That, that's a system glitch," Karen stammered. The smooth, rehearsed cadence she had used to paint me as a reckless criminal completely fractured. A sharp, ugly patch of crimson appeared on her neck. "The server must have auto-generated a test file. I never issued that." "A system glitch," Thatcher repeated smoothly, a predatory smile touching the corners of his lips. "Fascinating. Let's see if the vehicle's onboard cameras experienced a similar malfunction." He pressed play. The screen blossomed with the crisp, 4K resolution of my Tesla's Sentry Mode camera, and the trap I had spent 3 weeks quietly enduring finally snapped shut. On screen, through driving sheets of midnight rain, the headlights of a custom, enclosed golf cart cut into my driveway. The doors zipped open, and Karen Stone stepped directly into the frame. The camera tracked her in undeniable high-definition clarity as she marched out into the flooded road, aggressively yanked my orange construction cones out of the water, and dragged them up my driveway to hide them behind my trash cans. "Oh my God," Dr. Thorne's lawyer whispered. Karen's face drained of color so fast she looked ghost white in the sterile fluorescent lighting. She looked at the screen, then at her own corporate lawyers, who were already sliding their chairs away from her in disgust. 3 weeks ago, I had been a hard-working professional on the brink of an executive promotion. 2 weeks ago, I was the neighborhood pariah, facing total financial ruin and a multi-million-dollar lawsuit for public endangerment after a luxury SUV plummeted into a hidden 2-foot-deep sinkhole on my property line. I had been gaslit by my neighbors, abandoned by my insurance company, and trapped by a timeline I couldn't disprove because I had been in too much of a panicked rush to notice the world around me. I had spent 21 days questioning my own sanity, wondering if I truly was the monster who had caused a catastrophic accident. But as the video continued to play, showing Karen returning to my porch hours later to swap out the fraudulent violation notices while ambulances flashed in the background, I finally let out a breath. To understand how a puddle, 2 traffic cones, and a petty neighborhood dictator almost cost me my house, my career, and my freedom, you have to go back to that Tuesday evening. It started with a storm that wouldn't quit, a laptop displaying slide 24, and a routine check with a wooden broomstick that plunged straight into an invisible void. Today's story is from Callum Clark. Callum was a senior systems architect who spent his life translating unpredictable chaos into flawless, structured data. A meticulous man who ironed his suits on Sunday nights and kept his garage arranged with a level of order that bordered on a psychological diagnosis. He didn't build a safety barricade in the middle of torrential rainstorm for the drama or a sense of heroism. He did it because a 2-foot void in the earth was an error in the system that required immediate correction. He was the kind of person who genuinely believed that if you followed the rules, documented your work, and acted with objective logic, the universe would remain predictable. That fundamental, naive trust in structural order was exactly why he never saw the real trap coming, and why he was so completely unequipped for the subjective, malicious gaslighting of a suburban neighborhood dictator. Before we dive into today's story, If you like tales like this, smash that like button now. Comment below on where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. If you were in Callum's situation, what would you have done? Let's start a discussion. But now, let's hear Callum's story, as told in his own words. The rain had been hammering against my home office window for 3 straight hours, a relentless, deafening drone that made it completely impossible to focus. It was a Tuesday evening, the night before the most critical morning of my professional life. My laptop screen glowed in the otherwise dim room, displaying slide 24 of a presentation that was supposed to secure my executive promotion at the corporate conference downtown. I had spent months gathering the data, practicing my delivery, and refining every single bullet point. My entire career was riding on tomorrow, but the sheer volume of water throwing itself against the glass was an exhausting distraction. I rubbed my tired eyes, leaned back in my ergonomic office chair, and looked past my reflection out into the driveway. That was when I noticed the water gathering at the edge of my lot. Summit Ridge Luxury Estates prided itself on flawless infrastructure, manicured lawns, and pristine, newly paved asphalt. It was a neighborhood designed to look perfect at all times. But tonight's storm was aggressively overwhelming the community's drainage system. Down at the bottom of the slope dip where my private driveway met the main HOA thoroughfare, a massive, muddy puddle had formed. Under the amber glow of the neighborhood street lamp, it looked completely innocuous. Just a harmless, wide sheet of standing water that a driver might splash through without a second thought. But as I watched, a sudden, violent swirl in the very center of the puddle caught my eye. The water wasn't just pooling on top of the road. It was actively draining downward, disappearing into the asphalt itself, as if a plug had been pulled in a bathtub. A cold knot of unease tightened in my stomach. The movement wasn't normal. I shut my laptop, stood up, and hurried downstairs. I grabbed a heavy industrial flashlight from the kitchen utility drawer and a sturdy old wooden broom from the corner of the garage. I didn't even bother putting on boots. I just unbolted the side door and stepped out into the pouring rain, the sudden chill instantly cutting through my dress shirt. The heavy drops stung my face as I walked down the steep incline of my driveway. Within 3 steps, my leather loafers were completely soaked through, squelching miserably against the concrete. The storm was loud, the wind whipping through the manicured pine trees that gave our neighborhood its name. I stopped at the edge of the puddle. The muddy water was swirling aggressively, lapping around my ankles and pulling debris into a central vortex. I gripped the wooden broom by the very top of its handle, took a steady breath, and thrust the bristles into the center of the dark pool. I fully expected to hit solid pavement after an inch or two, perhaps a blocked storm drain at worst. Instead, the broom handle just kept going. My knuckles plunged straight past the surface and into the freezing water as the broom sank effortlessly, shearing through a brittle, dissolved layer of top-level asphalt. There was no resistance. I kept pushing down until the wooden handle finally juddered against a jagged shelf of rocks and broken concrete deep below the surface. I pulled the broom back up, wiping the rain from my eyes, and held my flashlight close to the dripping wood to examine the muddy waterline. 2 feet. I shone the flashlight directly into the swirling vortex, the beam cutting through the murky water just enough to reveal a terrifying reality. An old water main beneath the street must have ruptured under the pressure of the storm, completely washing away the soil and roadbed underneath. It was a literal void. A giant, wheel-swallowing trap was hidden beneath a perfectly flat, highly reflective sheet of rainwater. If a car hit this at the neighborhood speed limit of 25 miles per hour, it wouldn't just splash. The front passenger tire would drop straight into a 2-foot trench. The sudden stop would snap the axle, deploy the airbags, and potentially send the vehicle flipping down the street. I looked up and down the dark, empty neighborhood road, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I knew the county road crews were likely completely buried under emergency dispatches across the entire state tonight. Nobody from the city was coming to fix a suburban street anytime soon. Worse, tomorrow morning, this exact stretch of road was scheduled to handle the heavy traffic for the HOA's biggest event of the year, the annual Prestige Tour of Homes. Dozens of wealthy outsiders, real estate investors, and local VIPs would be driving down this exact lane in just a few hours. I couldn't just leave it like this. Someone was going to get seriously hurt, or worse. Turning on my heel, I hurried back toward the shelter of my garage, my mind frantically racing through a mental inventory of the tools, wood, and gear I had on hand to build a makeshift barricade before the next car drove by. The garage door rolled up with a heavy mechanical groan, revealing a stark contrast to the storm outside. Inside, everything was meticulously organized. Tools hung on pegboards, storage bins were stacked by label, and my pristine Tesla Model 3 sat silently in the center bay, plugged into its wall charger. Its glossy black paint caught the harsh fluorescent overhead lighting. I caught a glimpse of myself in the side mirror. My hair was plastered to my forehead, and my wet dress shirt clung miserably to my skin. I looked ridiculous, but there was no time to change. I bypassed the car and headed straight for the corner where I kept my leftover home improvement supplies. Tucked behind the lawnmower were two heavy-duty, bright orange construction cones I had bought during a DIY driveway resurfacing project last summer. Beside them leaned a thick sheet of plywood. I grabbed a black Sharpie from my workbench and wrote "Danger Sinkhole" ahead across the wood in massive, jagged block letters. I managed to wedge the plywood sign between the two cones, creating a makeshift but highly visible frame barricade. It wasn't elegant, but nobody with functioning eyes could miss it. Dragging the heavy assembly down the driveway in the pouring rain was brutal. The wind caught the plywood like a sail, threatening to rip it from my grip, but I managed to muscle it down to the curb. I waded back out into the flooded dip and set the barricade directly in the center of the lane, about 10 feet before the swirling vortex. The heavy rubber bases of the cones held firm against the rushing water, and the reflective orange stripes caught the glow of the street lamp perfectly. I stepped back onto my driveway, wiping a mixture of sweat and rain from my eyes. I felt a profound sense of relief. The road was blocked. Drivers would be forced to detour around the cul-de-sac, but they would be safe. I turned around to head back inside when a high-pitched electric whine pierced through the sound of the falling rain. Two small, bright headlights rounded the blind corner at the top of the street. It was a custom, enclosed lifted golf cart, the unmistakable rolling throne of Karen Stone, our neighborhood's tyrannical HOA president. The cart splashed violently through the gutters, its plastic weather enclosures fogging up, before screeching to a halt right at the edge of my property line. The zip-up plastic door flew open, and Karen stepped out. Despite the torrential downpour, she was immaculately dressed in a sharp, tailored pantsuit, her hair locked into a rigid, sprayed bob that seemed completely impervious to the wind. She didn't look at the flooded road. She didn't look at the swirling vortex. Her eyes pinned directly to my makeshift orange barricade, her face instantly twisting into an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Callum!" she barked, her voice cutting through the thunder like a whip. "What on earth do you think you are doing?" "Karen," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the storm as I walked toward her. "Don't drive through there. The water main under the asphalt ruptured. There's a sinkhole under that puddle. It's at least 2 feet deep." Karen didn't even blink. She marched right past me, her high heels splashing carelessly into the shallower water near the curb. She stopped a foot away from my sign, pointing a manicured, French-tipped finger at the bright orange plastic. "I do not care if the street is actively swallowing cars, Callum," she hissed, turning her glaring eyes back to me. "You know the rules. Section 4.2 of the Summit Ridge bylaws strictly prohibits non-standard, unauthorized commercial equipment on or adjacent to primary roadways. This is a visual blight. It ruins the community's curb appeal." I stared at her, completely dumbfounded. Curb appeal? "Karen, if a car hits that hole tomorrow morning, it's going to flip. The axle will snap instantly. It's a public safety hazard." "The annual Prestige Tour of Homes starts at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning," she stated, her voice dropping into a cold, menacing register. "We have high net worth buyers, real estate executives, and local media driving through those front gates. They are arriving via the main thoroughfare. I am not having them greeted by an ugly industrial eyesore and a handwritten piece of trash that makes our community look like a municipal construction zone. It's a safety barrier," I yelled, my patience entirely evaporating. "I called the county, but they are backlogged. Until they get a crew out here with official signage, this stays up. I'm not letting someone get hurt." Karen stepped closer, her perfume fighting a losing battle against the smell of wet asphalt. A cruel, bureaucratic smile spread across her lips. "Individual homeowners do not have the authority to declare road hazards or alter traffic flow, Callum. Minor road maintenance is strictly the purview of the HOA board. You have exactly two choices. You can pull these hideous objects off the street right now, or I will fine you $250 immediately, with an escalating penalty of $100 for every day they remain visible." "Fine me then," I said, digging my heels into the wet concrete. "Put it on my tab. I'm keeping the road blocked." Karen's smile vanished, replaced by a mask of cold fury. You think this is a game? We'll see how long you keep this attitude when the violation notice hits your account. Move this garbage, or I will have it removed for you. Without waiting for a response, she spun on her heel, marched back to her golf cart, and slammed the plastic door shut. The electric motor whined loudly as she aggressively slammed it into reverse, backed up my driveway, and sped off into the darkness, leaving me alone in the freezing rain. Shaking with a mix of adrenaline and pure anger, I walked back up to my house. I stripped off my soaked clothes in the mudroom, threw them straight into the washing machine, and headed upstairs. By the time I sat back down at my desk, my phone buzzed on the blotter. I picked it up. It was a push notification from the Summit Ridge HOA portal, time-stamped 11:45 p.m. Karen hadn't even waited for morning. I had been officially cited for an aesthetic violation. I let out a bitter laugh, tossed the phone aside, and opened my laptop. I had a career to save tomorrow. I couldn't let a petty neighborhood dictator ruin my sleep. I collapsed into bed an hour later, listening to the rain, comforted by the thought that whatever Karen's threats were, my heavy orange cones were still out there in the dark, standing guard. The high-pitched, frantic wail of my iPhone alarm shattered the silence of my bedroom like a siren. I bolted upright in bed, my heart instantly leaping into my throat. The room was bright, far too bright. Usually when my alarm went off, the room was shrouded in the gray, muted shadows of early dawn. I scrambled blindly for my phone on the nightstand, nearly knocking over a glass of water before my fingers finally gripped the smooth glass screen. I swiped it awake and checked the digital clock. 7:06 a.m. No, 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 I muttered, the words tasting like ash in my mouth as I violently ripped the blankets off and threw my legs over the side of the bed. The commuter express, the only bus that could get me downtown to the convention center in time for my 8:30 a.m. presentation, pulled away from the neighborhood stop at exactly 7:15 a.m. If I missed it, the next bus wouldn't arrive for another hour. I would miss my scheduled slot, blow the presentation, and throw away months of sleepless nights and hard work. My career depended entirely on being on that stage on time. The careful, methodical routine I had planned out the night before completely evaporated into pure, unadulterated chaos. I sprinted into the master bathroom, splashing freezing water on my face to shock my brain awake, and brushed my teeth with a speed that made my gums bleed. I skipped shaving entirely, barely sparing a glance at the dark circles under my eyes before running a comb through my messy, sleep-moosed hair. I raced across the hallway to my closet, practically tearing my sharply pressed navy suit trousers off the hanger. My hands were shaking so violently from the sudden spike of cortisol that I could barely manage the buttons on my white dress shirt. I shoved my bare feet into my leather loafers, which were still slightly damp and stiff from my midnight excursion into the rain, and grabbed my tie. I forced the silk fabric into a rushed, lopsided Windsor knot as I bounded down the stairs two at a time, nearly tripping over my own feet. I skidded into the kitchen, snatched my briefcase from the island counter, and scooped up the thick stack of my printed presentation notes. My phone buzzed aggressively in my palm with a final, unhelpful calendar alert. Depart now to avoid traffic. I didn't have time to breathe, let alone think about the night before. I ran into the mudroom, threw open the heavy deadbolt with a loud click, and ripped the front door open, stepping out into the morning air. The brutal storm from the night before had finally passed, leaving behind a crisp, humid suburban morning. The sun was just starting to peek through the breaking clouds, casting long, sharp shadows across the hyper-manicured lawns of Summit Ridge. The air smelled of wet pine and damp earth. I cleared the concrete porch steps in a single, desperate bound, my mind entirely trapped in a hyper-focused loop of slide structures, revenue metrics, and traffic timing. I sprinted down the concrete walkway, my eyes locked dead ahead on the pavement to avoid slipping. As I passed my driveway, I caught a brief, peripheral flash of my black Tesla Model 3 parked in its usual spot, its glossy paint covered in hundreds of tiny water droplets that sparkled in the early light. I didn't slow down for a fraction of a second. I didn't look right toward the road. I didn't look left toward the cul-de-sac. And I absolutely did not look back at the glass of my front door. I was running purely on adrenaline and panic. I hit the edge of my property, turned sharply onto the main neighborhood sidewalk, and pushed myself into a full-on, agonizing sprint toward the community entrance. My lungs were burning by the time the blue and white commuter bus pulled up to the curb at the end of the block. The heavy hydraulic brakes hissed loudly as the doors began to slide open. "Hold the door!" I gasped out loud, waving my briefcase frantically in the air as my loafers slapped against the pavement. The driver caught my eye in his massive side mirror and waited. I threw myself up the rubber-lined steps, completely out of breath, my tie askew and sweat already beating heavily at my hairline. I swiped my transit card against the digital reader with a trembling hand, nodded a breathless, pathetic thank you to the driver, and stumbled down the narrow aisle into an empty window seat near the back. I collapsed into the vinyl chair, burying my burning face in my hands as the bus lurched forward, merging onto the main arterial road outside the estate gates. I let out a long, shuddering exhale, my heart rate slowly beginning to descend from its panicked peak. I pulled my phone out of my pocket to check my speaking notes one last time, completely oblivious to the reality behind me. I was entirely blind to the fact that down in the flooded dip of the road, the asphalt lay completely bare. My heavy-duty orange construction cones were gone. The plywood warning sign had vanished. And back on my porch, firmly stuck to the center of my front door glass, a bright orange sheet of paper was fluttering softly in the morning breeze. The transition from the frantic panic of the morning to the sterile, windowless calm of the convention center was jarring. By 8:15 a.m., I was standing in the green room behind the main auditorium, trying to steady my breathing as I adjusted my lopsided tie in a polished silver mirror. The raw adrenaline from my morning sprint had finally settled, morphing into a cold, hyper-focused determination. I looked presentable, if a bit frayed around the edges, but the nervous energy humming in my chest was exactly what I needed to sharp focus my brain. I reviewed my opening lines one last time, memorizing the cadence of my speech. 5 minutes, Callum, a young production assistant whispered, holding open the heavy acoustic door just wide enough for the low murmur of the crowd to leak through. I nodded, smoothing down the lapels of my navy suit jacket. Per the convention center's strict data security and anti-distraction protocol, all presenters were required to store their personal devices before taking the stage. I walked over to the designated charging lockers lined against the back wall. I tapped my digital staff badge against the electronic reader on locker 42, tossed my phone onto the rubber velvet mat inside, and watched the heavy metal door click shut. The small LED light shifted from green to a solid, locked red. For the next several hours, I would be completely off the grid. No emails, no texts, no notifications. Just me, the clicker, and the stage. When my name finally echoed over the auditorium loudspeakers, I stepped out into the blinding, warm glare of the stage lights. The room was packed to capacity, a vast sea of hundreds of silhouettes sitting in velvet seats, their attention entirely pinned on the massive high-definition projector screen behind me. I took a deep, grounding breath, clicked to slide 1, and began to speak. Everything I had practiced over the last 3 months flowed effortlessly. The data points hit exactly where they were supposed to, and my voice held a steady, authoritative weight. When I finally revealed our projected Q4 revenue growth on slide 24, the very slide I had been obsessing over during the raging storm the night before, a visible wave of nods rippled through the front row of corporate executives. I could see my regional vice president leaning over to whisper something to the chief operating officer, a genuine smile on his face. I had them. The presentation wrapped to a resounding round of applause that echoed powerfully off the high concrete ceiling. As I walked off the stage into the wings, my shirt was damp with sweat under my wool suit jacket, but the sheer weight of professional relief washing over me was intoxicating. I had completely nailed it. The rest of the day blurred into a celebratory, fast-paced haze. Because of the success of the presentation, I was swept straight from the stage into an exclusive VIP networking lunch at the center's top-floor restaurant. Waiters in crisp white aprons moved seamlessly between mahogany tables, serving seared salmon and sparkling water. High-level executives who had ignored my introductory emails for the past fiscal year were suddenly sliding their heavy business cards across the white tablecloth, asking for my personal insights on market scaling and digital infrastructure. I floated through the conversations, shaking hands, laughing at corporate jokes, and basking in the intoxicating realization that my executive promotion was no longer a distant hope. It was a mathematical certainty. I was completely consumed by the brightest, most triumphant moment of my professional career. I never once thought about my phone sitting in the dark belly of locker 42. I had no way of knowing that at 10:14 a.m., my phone's screen had lit up silently inside the dark metal locker with an automated email notification from the Summit Ridge HOA server. I had no way of knowing that by 3:30 p.m., a flurry of frantic text messages from my next-door neighbor had begun to flood my inbox, followed closely by 3 missed calls from an unknown number with a local area code. While I was clinking glasses and talking about 5-year financial projections over hot espresso, the afternoon sun back in Summit Ridge was drying the pavement, casting a beautiful, deceptive light over the quiet suburban streets. And down in the flooded dip of the road, the camouflaged sinkhole sat waiting under its placid, shiny puddle, completely unprotected. The corporate high lasted all the way to the edge of the neighborhood. I spent the hour-long commute on the bus staring out the window at the passing highway. A smug, exhausted smile plastered across my face. In my mind, I was already moving my things into the corner office, imagining the salary bump, and calculating the exact day my new title would be officially announced. My phone was still tucked away deep in the front pocket of my leather briefcase, untouched since I had retrieved it from the convention center locker. I deliberately chose not to pull it out. I wanted to stretch the feeling of pure, uninterrupted success just a little bit longer before diving back into the mundane reality of unread emails, text messages, and work notifications. But the moment the bus hissed to a halt at the community gates of Summit Ridge at exactly 6 p.m., the fantasy shattered into 1,000 pieces. As I stepped off the rubber stairs and onto the pavement, the evening air felt thick, heavy, and strangely tense. I turned the corner onto my street, taking my usual path home, and the professional triumph that had carried me through the day evaporated in an instant. 100 yards ahead, the quiet, manicured piece of our luxury estate was completely gone. The sloped dip in the road right outside my driveway was blocked off by bright yellow police tape that fluttered violently in the evening breeze. Flashing red and blue emergency lights reflected off the wet leaves of the pine trees, casting a chaotic, rhythmic, and sickening glow over the front of my house. A cold knot of panic dropped straight into my stomach, leaving a hollow, freezing void. I pushed myself into a frantic jog, my leather loafers slapping hard against the concrete sidewalk as I hurried toward the flashing lights. A small crowd of my neighbors had gathered at the edge of the police perimeter, standing in quiet, whispering huddles, wrapped in jackets against the evening chill. I pushed past them, ignoring their sudden sharp glares, my eyes locking onto the center of the emergency zone. A massive yellow commercial crane truck was parked in the middle of the road, its heavy hydraulic stabilizers extended to support its weight. Steel cable lines tautened with a deep, mechanical groan as the crane slowly lifted a crumpled mass of dark metal out of the flooded dip. It was a brand new, luxury Mercedes SUV. The entire front passenger side was completely caved in, the wheel violently pushed back into the wheel well at a horrific angle. The windshield was a dense spiderweb of shattered glass, and the white fabric of the deployed side curtain airbags hung limply out of the broken windows like deflated balloons. "Oh my God," I breathed, stopping dead in my tracks at the edge of the yellow tape. The puddle was still there, but the water had partially drained throughout the afternoon, revealing the jagged, brutal truth beneath. A massive, gaping hole, about 4 feet wide and a solid 2 feet deep, had torn completely through the asphalt. The edges were sharp, jagged, and perfectly vertical, a sheer cliff face of broken stone and dissolved roadbed. Panic, cold and sharp, seized my chest. How could this have happened? I had spent my midnight hours dragging heavy industrial-grade construction cones into the freezing rain. I had built a massive wooden sign with bold, black lettering. I had placed them directly in the center of the lane 10 feet before the hazard. No one driving down this street could have missed them. It was a physical impossibility. My eyes frantically swept the cordoned-off area, searching the gutters and the grass for the bright orange plastic of my traffic cones or the splintered remains of my plywood sign. There was absolutely nothing. The road leading up to the sinkhole was completely, utterly bare. I stood there, frozen on the sidewalk, my mind spinning in a desperate, looping circle of confusion and dread. I was entirely blind to the mechanics of what had actually occurred while I was away. I didn't know that a prominent local VIP passenger was currently lying in a hospital bed with a severe spinal fracture. I didn't know that the beautiful morning sun had turned that puddle into a perfect, deadly mirror for an oncoming driver. And I had absolutely no idea that the real trap hadn't just been dug into the asphalt. It had been deliberately set right on my own property. I didn't have time to process the wreckage before a sharp, familiar voice cut through the drone of the crane's hydraulic motor. "There he is." "That's him, officer." I snapped my head around. Walking briskly up my driveway was Karen Stone, flanked by a tall, stern-faced county sheriff's deputy. Karen's immaculately sprayed bob hadn't moved an inch since the previous night, but her expression had shifted from bureaucratic annoyance to a mask of performative, calculated grief. She was holding a pristine manila folder against her chest like a shield. "Callum Clark?" the deputy asked, his voice low and heavy. He rested a hand near his utility belt, his eyes mapping the sweat on my forehead and my rumpled suit jacket. "Are you the homeowner at Lot 142? "Yes," I stammered, my hands tightening around the handle of my briefcase. "Yes, I am. What happened?" "I put up cones last night. I put up a sign right before the hazard." "Save it, Callum," Karen interrupted, her voice trembling with a rehearsed, dramatic quiver. She turned to the deputy, pointing a French-tipped fingernail directly at my face. "He's been negligent from the very start. I warned him last night that he couldn't leave hazards unattended on his property line. And look what he did instead." She marched past me, gesturing toward the side of my double garage. My eyes followed her hand, and my breath caught sharply in my throat. Sitting neatly in the narrow gap between my brick wall and my plastic green trash cans were my two heavy-duty orange construction cones. Stacked perfectly between them was my plywood sign, the bold black Sharpie words, "Danger, sinkhole ahead," staring right back at me in the flashing red and blue lights. "No," I whispered, taking a step backward. A wave of dizziness washed over me. "No, that's impossible. I put those out in the middle of the street at midnight. They were in the road. We found them hidden right there, sir," the deputy said, his tone shifting into something noticeably colder. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket. "Mrs. Stone notified us that she personally witnessed you moving the safety gear out of the thoroughfare and stashing it by your garage first thing this morning, right before you ran off to catch your commuter bus." "I didn't touch them," I yelled, my voice cracking with a sudden surge of panic. "I woke up late. I was running to catch the 7:15 a.m. express. I didn't even look at the road." "She's lying. She came by last night and threatened to find me if I didn't take them down." Karen let out a soft, horrified gasp, covering her mouth with her hand. "Callum, how can you say that? The HOA has strict safety protocols for road maintenance. Why on earth would I tell you to remove warning signs?" "Officer, he's clearly frantic. He realized he caused a catastrophic accident because he didn't want traffic cones blocking his view. And now he's inventing wild stories." "That's not what happened," I pleaded, turning back to the deputy. My chest felt tight, the air suddenly hard to breathe. "Check my front door. She told me she was going to find me. There has to be a notice." "Oh, there is a notice," Karen said smoothly. She reached into her manila folder and pulled out a bright orange sheet of paper, handing it directly to the deputy. "I personally taped the official citation to his front door at 7:15 a.m., right after I caught him clearing the road for his own convenience. It's all documented." The deputy took the paper, nodding slowly as he scanned the text. I stepped closer, my eyes desperate to read the words printed on the bright orange card. It was a formal HOA violation notice, but the text was a complete nightmare. It explicitly accused me of maliciously removing official HOA safety signage and obstructing an emergency evaluation of the roadbed. The timestamp printed at the top reads 7:15 a.m. I began, but the words died in my throat. My mind spun backward to the morning. I had been in a blind, hysterical rush. I had sprinted down the porch steps, past my Tesla, and straight to the bus stop. I hadn't looked at the glass of my front door. I hadn't looked at the road. I had been entirely blind to the world around me. Did I move them? A sickening, intrusive thought crept into the back of my brain, planting a seed of crippling self-doubt. Did I clear the path in a sleep-deprived daze last night before bed? Did I drag them over by the trash cans and completely forget about it in the morning panic? "Mr. Clark," the deputy said, closing his notepad with a definitive snap. "A passenger in that vehicle was just rushed to the county hospital with a broken collarbone and a severe spinal fracture. The victim's name is Dr. Eris Thorne. His legal team is already requesting copies of this police report." He looked from the orange paper to the cones by my trash cans and finally back to my pale face. "You need to contact your homeowner's insurance provider immediately, sir. Because based on the physical evidence and witness testimony at the scene, you are looking at a multi-million-dollar public endangerment lawsuit. And right now, you don't have a leg to stand on." The next 48 hours were a blur of cold, suffocating dread. The threat of the lawsuit wasn't just a distant possibility anymore. It arrived on a Thursday afternoon in a crisp, white overnight courier envelope. The document was a formal notice of intent to sue from a high-powered legal firm downtown, representing Dr. Eris Thorne. The language was clinical and devastating, detailing a catastrophic spinal fracture, emergency surgery, and temporary paralysis. It explicitly named me as the primary defendant, citing gross negligence and public endangerment on my property line. My homeowner's insurance provider had already panicked when I called them, their corporate adjuster muttering nervously about intentional tort exclusions and unsupported claims. If the court ruled I had deliberately hidden the safety gear, my policy wouldn't pay a single cent. I would lose the house, my savings, and my future. Driven by a desperate, frantic need for proof, I sat down at my desk on Thursday night. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely type my password into the Summit Ridge HOA online portal. "Come on," I whispered into the dark room, the glow of the monitor reflecting off my pale face. "It has to be here." I was looking for the paper trail. Karen had stated under oath to the police that she fined me at 7:15 a.m. for removing the signs, but I distinctly remembered my phone buzzing at 11:45 p.m. the night before the accident. I remembered the surge of anger I felt when the push notification hit my screen while I was working on my slides. That original fine had been for putting up the cones. If I could pull up that 11:45 p.m. citation, it would prove Karen was lying about the entire timeline. It would prove she knew about the sinkhole before the accident even happened. I clicked on the Account History tab. A loading wheel spun for 3 agonizing seconds. The screen blinked. The ledger was completely blank. I frowned, a cold sweat breaking out across my neck. I clicked on Violation Records. Nothing. I went to the Fines and Fees ledger. The $250 penalty from Tuesday night had completely vanished. According to the live, front-facing database, my account was in perfect standing. There was no record of any fine ever being issued to Lot 142 on the night of the storm. No, no, no. That's impossible, I muttered, my voice cracking in the empty house. I aggressively refreshed the browser. I cleared my cache. I logged out and logged back in. The result was exactly the same. The digital footprint of the 11:45 p.m. citation had been completely scrubbed from the system. It hit me then, a sickening realization that made my stomach turn over. Karen didn't just manage the HOA. As board president, she held total administrative credentials for the neighborhood's digital portal. She had back-end access to the servers. After the crash occurred, she must have logged in with her admin profile and wiped the original violation history from the live ledger, deleting the evidence of her own bureaucratic malice. I picked up my phone and called the insurance investigator back, my voice trembling as I tried to explain what I had just discovered. "She deleted it," I said, pacing the length of my home office. "The HOA president has admin rights. She scrubbed the original fine from Tuesday night to make her fake 7:15 a.m. notice look like the only one that ever existed." There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the investigator sighing, the sound of papers rustling. "Mr. Clark," the investigator said, his tone dripping with pitying skepticism. "Do you have a physical copy of that Tuesday night notice? A screenshot? A downloaded PDF?" "No," I admitted, my chest tightening. "I was in a rush for my conference. I didn't screenshot it. I just saw the push notification." "Then, with all due respect, sir, you're grasping at straws," the investigator replied coldly. "Right now, Mrs. Stone has a signed, physical paper notice backdated to Thursday morning, backed by her eyewitness testimony and the physical traffic cones found hidden by your garage. You are claiming a digital conspiracy with absolutely zero proof. If you want us to fight a multi-million-dollar legal team from a prestigious downtown firm, you need to give us a weapon. Right now, all you're giving us is an active imagination." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone from my ear, the room spinning around me. Karen's gaslighting was working. Without a single piece of physical or digital evidence to back up my memory, I was starting to look like a reckless, pathological liar who was fabricating stories to avoid financial ruin. I slumped back into my chair, staring at the blank HOA portal screen, completely suffocated by the weight of my own helplessness. By Friday morning, the isolation was total. Summit Ridge Luxury Estates had transformed from a peaceful suburban sanctuary into a modern-day panopticon. When I walked down my driveway to retrieve the morning paper, Mrs. Gable from across the street, a woman I had helped shovel out of a snowdrift just last winter, abruptly turned her back on me and hurried inside, slamming her door. When I drove toward the neighborhood exit, groups of joggers stopped and openly stared at me, their faces hardened into expressions of collective condemnation. The rumor mill had done its work. Karen had successfully painted me as the neighborhood pariah, a reckless, self-absorbed careerist who had stubbornly hidden life-saving safety gear behind his garage just because he didn't want a couple of bright orange cones messing up his morning view. The psychological toll was suffocating. I spent the entire afternoon pacing the floorboards of my living room, my phone sitting on the coffee table like a ticking bomb. Every time it buzzed, a fresh spike of adrenaline shot through my chest. My regional vice president had called earlier, his tone carefully guarded and stripped of the warmth he had shown at the convention center VIP lunch. "Callum," he had said, his voice flat. "We've been made aware of a significant legal incident involving public endangerment at your residence. Given the high-profile nature of the upcoming executive promotion, the board feels it's best to pause your transition until this matter is entirely resolved." My promotion was frozen. My reputation was shattered. My savings were on the brink of being liquidated by a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. The worst part wasn't the external pressure. It was the insidious, creeping rot of self-doubt. Because I was trapped by my own panicked timeline, my brain began playing cruel tricks on me. I spent hours sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the floor, replaying those early morning hours in an endless, agonizing loop. Did I wake up in the middle of the night in a sleep-deprived haze and move those cones? Was I so worried about my presentation that I subconsciously cleared my driveway to ensure a perfect exit? I couldn't remember looking at the road. I couldn't remember looking at the front door. I was completely, utterly blind. Without an alibi and without a single shred of physical evidence, I was starting to believe my own guilt. By 9 p.m., the walls of the house felt like they were closing in on me. The whispers of the neighborhood seemed to echo through the quiet rooms. Driven by a desperate need to escape the suffocating silence, I grabbed my keys, slipped out the side door, and walked into the dark, cool air of the garage. I didn't want to drive anywhere. I just needed a space where nobody could look at me. I opened the driver's side door of my black Tesla Model 3, climbed into the premium vegan leather seat, and pulled the door shut. The heavy, insulated seal of the cabin instantly cut off the outside world, plunging me into a soothing, womb-like quiet. I leaned my head back against the headrest, closing my eyes and letting out a long, ragged breath that trembled in my throat. I pressed my foot against the brake pedal, and the massive 15-inch central touchscreen hummed to life, casting a soft blue glow over the dark interior of the garage. I stared blankly at the map on the screen, my mind utterly exhausted from 3 days of endless panic. I was about to tap the screen to turn off the display and sit in the dark when a small, pulsing notification icon in the top right corner of the dashboard caught my eye. It was a bright blue camera icon with a tiny number badge next to it. My breath caught in my throat. The knot in my stomach tightened, but this time, it wasn't from fear. It was from a sudden, staggering jolt of realization. Sentry mode. Because I lived in a highly active HOA with constant landscaping crews, delivery trucks, and golf carts rolling past my property line, I had set my Tesla's security system to remain continuously active whenever the car was parked in the driveway. The vehicle's 8 external cameras didn't just sleep. They constantly monitored a 360-degree perimeter, silently recording high-definition video onto a hidden flash drive in the glove box whenever they detected motion near the car. And throughout the entire storm, the morning panic, and the chaotic afternoon of the accident, my car had been parked right in the center of the driveway, facing the front porch. Side repeater cameras pointing directly at the garage wall. Rear camera mapping the street. My hands began to shake violently. Not from cortisol this time, but from pure, unadulterated hope. I reached out a trembling index finger and tapped the blue icon on the touchscreen. A submenu slid open with a clinical, automated list of system logs. At the very top of the list, a bold line of text stared back at me in the blue light. Sentry mode. 4 events recorded on Tuesday, March 24th, 2026. I swallowed hard, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird, and tapped the first video file. The high-definition video viewer blossomed across the 15-inch touchscreen, its crisp resolution slicing through the dark garage like a beacon. The default view came from the front-facing camera, offering a wide-angle perspective from the windshield. I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the playback bar, terrified that the footage would confirm my own worst fears. I tapped the play icon. The first file was timestamped 5 a.m. The storm was still raging on screen, sheets of torrential rain illuminating the air under the amber glow of the street lamp. The main thoroughfare was a dark, watery blur. For the first 20 seconds, nothing happened. Then, A pair of weak halogen headlights cut through the gloom. A covered golf cart splashed into the frame and skidded to a halt at the edge of my driveway. My breath hitched. The zip-up plastic door tore open, and Karen Stone stepped into the downpour. Even in the grainy night vision footage, her rigid, unmoving hairstyle was instantly recognizable. She didn't hesitate. She marched directly out into the flooded dip, grabbed my two heavy-duty orange construction cones by their rubber bases, and dragged them backward. She hauled them completely out of the street, stomping right through the puddle I had measured with my broomstick. The camera caught the stark clarity of her movements as she lugged the heavy plywood sign up my driveway, out of the road's view, and wedged the entire assembly neatly into the narrow gap right next to my green trash cans. "You absolute sociopath," I whispered, my voice echoing sharply inside the insulated cabin of the car. But she wasn't done. The video tracked her as she marched up my porch steps, pulled a bright orange card from her jacket pocket, and slapped it firmly onto the glass of my front door. She paused, took a quick photo of it with her smartphone to log it into the HOA database, and then hurried back to her golf cart, speeding off into the dark. I let out a ragged, trembling exhale, a massive surge of relief washing over me so violently I felt dizzy. I hadn't forgotten. I hadn't sleepwalked. I hadn't cleared the road in a panic. I was sane. I skipped forward to the next file, timestamped 7 a.m. The morning sun was just starting to crest the trees. The camera captured me bursting through my front door in a wild, frantic sprint. On the video, I watched my fictional self tear down the steps, my eyes locked entirely on my wrist as I checked my watch. I ran right past the parked Tesla, entirely oblivious to the road layout, and bolted toward the bus stop. The video clearly showed the bright orange notice stuck to my front door glass as I ran away. I skipped to the third file, 3:30 p.m. The afternoon sun had dried the main road, leaving the flooded dip looking like a completely flat, harmless mirror. A dark luxury Mercedes SUV entered the frame from the top of the street, maintaining a steady speed. It hit the puddle. The impact on video was sickening. The front passenger tire dropped instantly into the invisible 2-foot void. The suspension exploded in a spray of sparks and plastic fragments. The rear of the massive SUV launched into the air, twisting violently before slamming down onto its side, sliding across the dry pavement until it screeched to a halt right in front of my lot. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I opened the final file, 4:15 p.m. The background of the video was a chaotic mess of flashing red and blue lights from the ambulance and fire trucks. Amidst the confusion, Karen walked back into the frame. She wasn't looking at the paramedics. She was staring directly at my house. She marched up my porch steps, her face twisted in absolute panic. The side repeater camera caught her in crystal clear profile as she aggressively ripped the original 5 a.m. notice off my front door glass. She crumpled it into a tight ball, shoved it deep into her trench coat pocket, and then smoothed down a brand new, fabricated orange sheet of paper, taping it exactly where the old one had been. She had literally performed a magic trick on my front porch to frame me for a catastrophic injury. "I have you," I breathed, a cold, hard smile finally breaking across my face. I have everything. But there was still one missing puzzle piece. Karen had deleted the digital record of the 11:45 p.m., 5 a.m. fine from the live HOA database, which was why the insurance investigator had dismissed my story. I pulled my smartphone out of my briefcase, my fingers flying across the screen. If Karen had deleted it from the server, she had done it after the system had already generated the automatic violation alert. I opened my email application and bypassed the primary inbox. I scrolled past the folders, down to the very bottom of the menu, and tapped on the spam archive. My thumb froze. There it was. An unread message from no-reply at whisperingpinshoa.org. Timestamp Tuesday at 5:01 a.m. I tapped the email open. The automated system message read, "Notification of fine assessment, Lot 142. A digital copy of your violation notice has been attached for your records." I clicked the attached PDF download link. The document blossomed on my phone screen, a bright orange digital replica of the original notice. I scrolled down to the description of offense section. Karen's own bureaucratic words stared back at me. Locked in a permanent digital time capsule she couldn't touch. Property owner has placed highly reflective, non-standard commercial safety equipment, 2 orange construction cones, and 1 unapproved handwritten sign on or adjacent to the primary entrance roadway. These industrial items severely compromise the community's luxury aesthetic standards. She had scrubbed the website, but she couldn't scrub my personal inbox. I had the automated digital receipt, the time-stamped proof of her knowledge of the hazard, and a 360-degree multi-angle video of her committing evidence tampering and a corporate frame job. I leaned my head back against the headrest, letting out a laugh that quickly turned into a deep, shaking breath of pure vindication. The suffocating weight that had crushed my chest for 3 days was completely gone. Karen thought she had built the perfect trap to save her own skin, but she had done it right in front of an 8-camera security system. My lawyer's office didn't look like a battlefield, but the moment I showed him the files, it felt exactly like one. Thatcher Cross was a veteran defense attorney with a sharp, silver mane, tailored charcoal suits, and a reputation for treating arrogant corporate entities the way a wolf treats a stray sheep. He sat behind a massive, polished mahogany desk on the 12th floor of a sleek downtown high-rise. Outside his floor-to-ceiling windows, the city skyline stretched out in a blur of glass and steel. But inside the office, the focus was entirely on the screen of his laptop. For the first 10 minutes of our meeting, Thatcher didn't say a single word. The only sound in the room was the low, steady hum of the air conditioning and the rhythmic clicking of his mouse. He watched the Tesla footage loop on his screen, shifting from the front-facing camera to the side repeaters, analyzing every frame in absolute silence. His fingers were tinted beneath his chin, his sharp blue eyes reflecting the blue glow of the monitor. Then, he opened the 5:01 a.m. automated email PDF I had recovered from my spam folder. He zoomed in on the timestamp, cross-referencing it meticulously with the official police report Karen had filed. A slow, terrifyingly brilliant smile spread across Thatcher's face. He slid his reading glasses off his nose, tossed them onto a stack of legal briefs, and leaned back in his heavy leather chair. "Callum," he said, his voice a smooth, low baritone that commanded the room. "Do you know what the average, hot-headed person does when they find a smoking gun of this magnitude? They call the police?" I guessed, my heart still humming with the residual adrenaline of the discovery. "Exactly," Thatcher nodded, tapping the cap of an expensive fountain pen against his desk. "They call the police, or they march straight to the next HOA board meeting and scream themselves hoarse in front of the neighborhood. And do you know what happens next? The target panics. They immediately hire a massive public relations firm. Their corporate insurance lawyers build an impenetrable defensive wall, and they claim the video is a digital fabrication, an AI deepfake, or a breach of privacy. They mitigate the damage before a judge or a jury ever sets eyes on it." He leaned forward, placing his forearms on the desk, his steel-like gaze locking onto mine with absolute intensity. "We are not going to do that. Karen Stone thinks she has played a masterclass in bureaucratic chess. She thinks you are completely broken, isolated, and ready to default on a multi-million-dollar civil suit. She thinks you're a standard, terrified homeowner she can easily crush to save her own skin. We are going to let her keep thinking exactly that." "What's the plan, then?" I asked, a cold, sharp thrill running straight down my spine. "We say absolutely nothing," Thatcher stated flatly, a predatory edge to his tone. "We don't send this footage to the sheriff's department. We don't forward a single byte to the insurance adjusters. We file a standard, deliberately quiet response to Dr. Thorne's intent to sue notice, and we immediately fast-track a formal legal deposition. We will invite Dr. Thorne's legal team, the HOA's corporate defense lawyers, and Karen herself into a room under the guise of a routine liability assessment." I frowned, trying to follow the high-stakes legal logic. "You want her in a room? Just like that?" "I want her under oath, Callum," Thatcher said, his smile widening into something genuinely dangerous. "A deposition is a sworn statement. If she lies to a neighbor, it's petty gossip. If she lies to a deputy on a driveway, it's a misdemeanor. But if she sits in front of a licensed court reporter, swears a holy oath to tell the truth, and explicitly manufactures a fraudulent timeline to shift a multi-million-dollar personal liability onto an innocent homeowner, that is a felony. It is perjury. It is spoliation of evidence. It is fraud." He reached over and closed the laptop with a definitive, incredibly satisfying snap. "We are going to let her build her own gallows. She's going to lock her fake timeline into the official court record under penalty of imprisonment. And once she is completely, utterly trapped in her own web of lies, we press play." For the first time in an entire week, the invisible, suffocating noose around my neck completely loosened. I stood up, shook Thatcher's hand, and walked out of the high-rise. For the next 3 weeks, I had to play the part of the defeated, ruined pariah. I had to endure the cold stares of my neighbors on the sidewalk and the icy silence of my corporate colleagues at work. But as I drove back through the gates of Summit Ridge that evening, Looking at the fresh, black patch of asphalt where the sinkhole used to be, I didn't feel a single shred of fear anymore. I just felt a quiet, burning anticipation for the day of the deposition. The conference room on the 24th floor of the downtown high-rise felt less like a sanctuary of justice and more like a corporate execution chamber. Thick, soundproof glass windows overlooked the sprawling city below. But inside, the atmosphere was suffocating. A massive, polished quartz table anchored the center of the room, flanked by heavy leather chairs. Sitting across from me was the legal firing squad. Dr. Eris Thorne's high-powered personal injury team occupied the left side of the table, their facial expressions sharp, clinical, and predatory. To their right sat the HOA's primary corporate defense lawyers, two men in identical charcoal suits who looked like they had been genetically engineered to protect insurance funds. And right in the middle of them sat Karen Stone. She looked entirely in her element. She wore a tailored cream blazer, her rigid, lacquered hair completely unmoving, and her hands folded neatly over a pristine manila folder. When I walked in with Thatcher Cross, she didn't just look at me. She looked through me with a smirk of pure administrative triumph. She truly believed this was the day she officially transferred a multi-million-dollar liability to my name. At the head of the table, a licensed court reporter adjusted her stenography machine, her face an unreadable mask of professional detachment. "Everyone is present," Thatcher said smoothly, pulling out a chair for me before taking his seat. He unbuttoned his suit jacket with a slow, deliberate calmness that sent a quiet jolt of confidence through my chest. "We can begin." Dr. Thorne's lead attorney, a razor-sharp woman named Peterson, wasted no time. She looked directly at Karen. "Mrs. Stone, you are under oath. Please state your full name and your capacity within the Summit Ridge Homeowners Association." "Karen Stone. I am the elected president of the board of directors," she said, her voice dripping with a practiced, somber dignity. "Let's focus on the morning of Tuesday the 14th, Peterson continued, leaning forward. "Can you describe the road conditions outside Lot 142 prior to the accident involving my client?" Karen let out a soft, rehearsed sigh, tilting her head with a look of profound disappointment. "It was a tragedy that could have been completely avoided. The HOA had received automated alerts about minor pooling in that dip. As president, I immediately dispatched a notice to procure official municipal barriers. We were actively managing the situation." "And what did you discover upon patrolling the neighborhood that morning?" Karen adjusted her posture, turning her gaze directly toward the court reporter to ensure every word was locked into the official record. "At exactly 7:15 a.m., I drove past Mr. Clark's property," Karen stated, her voice hardening. "I caught him in the act. He was violently dragging official safety markers out of the street and hiding them behind his garage. I stopped my vehicle and confronted him. I told him he was creating a deadly trap for the prestige tour of homes. He yelled at me, stating he didn't care about the road because he was running late for a bus. I sat entirely still, my hands folded beneath the table, watching her weave the noose around her own neck." "And what did you do in response to this confrontation, Mrs. Stone?" Peterson asked, her pen hovering over her legal pad. "I did my duty," Karen said smoothly, opening her manila folder and sliding a bright orange sheet of paper across the court's table. "I immediately issued a formal violation notice for malicious property removal and public obstruction. I taped it to his front door right then and there at 7:15 a.m. I begged him to put the cones back. He refused, ran to the bus, and left the street completely bare. The crash happened shortly after." The corporate insurance lawyers nodded solemnly. Peterson looked across the table at me, her eyes cold. "Mr. Cross, your client has admitted he was home during this exact window. Do you have any cross-examination? Or can we move toward scheduling the formal settlement terms?" Thatcher Cross didn't flinch. He leaned forward, resting his forearms on the polished quartz, his sharp blue eyes locking onto Karen like a hawk, targeting a field mouse. "Just a few clarifications, Mrs. Stone," Thatcher said, his baritone voice sending a sudden, tense ripple through the room. "You are completely certain of this timeline? You explicitly swear, under penalty of perjury, that you never touched Mr. Clark's property prior to 7:15 a.m.? "I do," Karen said sneeringly, her chin rising in defiance. "I swear it. The physical evidence speaks for itself. The cones were found hidden by his trash cans, and the 7:15 a.m. notice was on his door. And you explicitly swear that you never issued any prior fines or notifications regarding this specific hazard on the night of Monday the 13th. "Absolutely not," Karen scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Why would I fine him before? The HOA wasn't even formally involved until that morning. There was no prior fine. Mr. Clark is simply inventing stories to deflect from his own catastrophic negligence. Thatcher nodded slowly, a small, dark smile touching the corners of his lips. He reached down into his leather briefcase, pulled out a sleek silver USB drive, and slid it smoothly across the court's table toward the court reporter's monitor system. "Mrs. Stone," Thatcher said softly, the predatory edge finally bleeding into his tone. "I'd like to introduce Exhibit A." Thatcher tapped a few keys on his tablet, and the massive, high-definition monitor mounted on the conference room wall hummed to life. "Let the record show," Thatcher announced to the court reporter, "that we are reviewing authenticated digital evidence retrieved from the onboard security array of my client's vehicle." The room went dead silent. Karen leaned back in her chair, her smirk still firmly intact, though her fingers tightened slightly against her manila folder. "First," Thatcher said, clicking a file link, "let us examine the live HOA ledger that Mrs. Stone claims contains no record of a prior fine." He projected a document on the screen. "This is a verified copy of an automated email sent from the Summit Ridge server to my client's personal inbox, timestamped Tuesday at 5:01 a.m. Peterson, Dr. Thorne's lawyer, leaned forward, her eyes narrowing as she read the text aloud. "Violation notice. Unauthorized signage. Fine. $250. Issued by K. Stone." Peterson slowly turned her head to look at Karen. The corporate defense lawyers in the identical charcoal suits suddenly stopped nodding. That's a system glitch," Karen stammered, her voice losing its smooth, administrative cadence. A sharp patch of crimson appeared on her neck. "The server must have auto-generated a test file. I never issued that." "A system glitch," Thatcher repeated smoothly. "Fascinating. Let's see if the vehicle's onboard cameras experienced a similar malfunction." He pressed play on the first video file. The screen blossomed with the crisp, 4K resolution of the Tesla's front-facing Sentry Mode camera. The timestamp in the corner read 5 a.m. Through the driving sheets of night rain, the headlights of a custom, enclosed golf cart cut into the driveway. The door zipped open, and Karen Stone stepped directly into the frame. The camera tracked her in undeniable high-definition clarity as she marched into the flooded road, aggressively yanked Kalam's orange construction cones out of the water, and dragged them up the driveway, jamming them behind the trash cans. The screen then shifted to the side repeater camera, showing her face in perfect profile as she slapped an orange violation notice onto Kalam's front door. "Oh my God," Peterson whispered under her breath. Karen's face drained of color so fast she looked ghost white in the sterile fluorescent lighting. That's a deep fake," she whispered, her hands beginning to tremble against the table. "He fabricated that. He's trying to frame me." "We aren't finished, Mrs. Stone," Thatcher said, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly calm register. "Let's skip ahead to 4:15 p.m., roughly 45 minutes after the catastrophic accident involving Dr. Thorne." He clicked the final video file, the screen filled with the chaotic flashing red and blue lights of the emergency vehicles. In the middle of the panic, the camera captured Karen sneaking back onto Callum's porch. The frame zoomed in, capturing the absolute desperation on her face as she aggressively ripped the 5 a.m. notice off the glass door, crumpled it into a ball, shoved it into her blazer pocket, and taped a brand new, fabricated notice in its place. The room descended into absolute, suffocating silence. The two corporate defense lawyers for the HOA slowly slid their chairs back, physically distancing themselves from Karen at the court's table. One of them closed his laptop with a sharp click, stood up, and looked directly at Thatcher. "Mr. Cross," the HOA's lead attorney said, his voice completely stripped of its previous corporate confidence. "The Summit Ridge Homeowners Association wishes to formally state, on the record, that Mrs. Stone's actions were entirely unauthorized, outside the scope of her duties, and constitute independent intentional fraud. Our firm is immediately withdrawing our representation of Mrs. Stone as an individual." "What?" Karen gasped, her voice shrill as she looked up at her own legal team. "You can't do that. You represent the board." "Not when the board president commits felony perjury and evidence tampering, Karen," the lawyer replied coldly. He looked back at Thatcher. "We will contact your office within the hour to discuss a full corporate settlement covering all of Mr. Clark's legal fees and damages. Good day." The two corporate lawyers packed their briefcases in a frantic rush and practically sprinted out of the conference room, leaving Karen sitting entirely alone. Peterson stood up next, turning a cold, predatory gaze onto Karen. "Mrs. Stone, my firm will be amending our civil suit by the end of business today. We are removing Callum Clark entirely. We are suing you personally and the HOA corporate entity for gross negligence, fraudulent concealment, and punitive damages. I suggest you find a criminal defense attorney. Within 2 minutes, the room cleared out, leaving only the court reporter silently packing her machine, Thatcher, and me. Karen remained frozen in her chair, staring blankly at the wall monitor where her own face was still paused in mid-theft. The smug, untouchable neighborhood dictator had completely vanished, replaced by a broken woman facing total financial ruin and immediate criminal prosecution. Thatcher unplugged his USB drive, dropped it into his pocket, and turned to me with a brilliant, satisfied smile. "Come on, Callum," he said, slapping me on the shoulder. "Let's get out of here." We walked out of the high-rise and into the bright, warm afternoon sunlight. I took a deep, unrestricted breath of fresh air, the invisible noose that had choked me for weeks finally gone. As I walked toward the parking garage, I looked at my phone. A text message from my vice president was already waiting on my screen, asking if I was available to discuss my executive promotion first thing Monday morning. I smiled, unlocked my Tesla from across the street, and felt a profound wave of gratitude for the silent, 8-camera witness that had been sitting in my driveway all along. And that's Callum's story. Once again, thank you for sticking around, and if you made it this far, know I am so grateful for each and every one of you for sharing an hour or so with me. If you enjoyed the story, consider subscribing. It's the best way to help a small channel like this get noticed by the algorithm. But now, I'll turn it over to you. What do you think of today's story? What would you have done if you were in Callum's shoes? Comment below your thoughts, and I hope to see you in the next one.